Good morning. I'm George Miller with citizensjournal.us, working in conjunction with KADY TV today. This is the Good Morning Oxnard show. I won't tell anyone if you don't, but we're actually doing it in the afternoon today, a day early. The reason we called this special session, and we've invited Mayor Tim Flynn and David Finn. Let me just briefly explain who these folks are. Everyone knows who Mayor Flynn is already that lives in Oxnard. He's been on the council for 8 years. He's been elected and re-elected for mayor. And the reason we asked him here today is he has a very special passion and a strategic understanding of the importance of Channel Islands Harbor, which is what our discussion will be about today. 51 years ago, Channel Islands Harbor Agreement was put together between Ventura County and Oxnard for the operation of the harbor. That expired a year ago, has been renewed in small increments, and next Tuesday at the City Council meeting they will be presenting an interim agreement for inspection. And we want to talk about some of the issues behind that so that people listening to this will be more motivated to come to the City Council meeting next Tuesday and participate in that. David Finn, who's with us today, is working with Citizens Journal on a series of articles about Channel Islands Harbor. He probably has done more detailed on-the-ground research of Channel Islands Harbor businesses than anyone in existence. He's talked to over 90 businesses and interviewed them as to their problems, preferences, and things like that. He's done some financial and operations research too. David's background is very strong in commercial real estate development and in high-tech sales and marketing as well. He's also a resident of Hollywood Beach, and you've been there how long?
Since 1997.
Since 1997, so for quite a while. So we're going to start off with Mayor Flynn, who's going to give us an overall statement on this Channel Islands Harbor situation and his views.
Well, thank you very much, George. As you stated correctly, the agreement between the county and the city, County of Ventura and the city of Oxnard, originated in 1963, and it was a 50-year agreement that, if I understand it correctly, was amended 7 times in the 50-year time period. And in essence, it was kind of a division of labor, or one could even say somewhat of a burden sharing of the cost to maintain Channel Islands Harbor. And it's an interesting scenario because the county owns all the land. However, it's also incorporated into the city of Oxnard. So because it's incorporated into the city of Oxnard, it means that the streets and the sewers and everything else are maintained by the city, and other areas are maintained by the county. So it's a very unique arrangement, and one could argue that the first 50 years, or the agreement, served both the county and the city well for a good portion of the 50 years. But sometime maybe around 20 years ago, things started to change in Channel Islands Harbor, and a lot of it has to do with perhaps changes in development and demographics and a variety of issues. And so about 20 years ago, things started to change in Channel Islands Harbor, and I would argue that the Channel Islands Harbor that I grew up with is nothing like the Channel Islands Harbor that is today. In other words, Channel Islands Harbor was thriving 25 years ago. So there are a variety of reasons for that, and I'm less concerned about who to blame about it than trying to take Channel Islands Harbor, which really is Oxnard's, other than the people of Oxnard, its #1 asset. The coastal areas and the harbor are just second to none, not only in the county, but arguably in the state of California. So what happened is this agreement, as you stated correctly, expired a year ago. The city manager, Greg Nyhoff, asked for a 4-month extension, and that was in November, I believe it was, and so that we could try to hammer out the details with the county and get a new agreement that was going to best serve the city of Oxnard, and of course the county of Ventura. And here we are today. Next week, I believe on the 17th, the city council is going to see for the first time this agreement that has been negotiated, and it's going to be, I would imagine, ratified or approved by the city council and then forwarded on to the board of supervisors. So I'm excited. I'm excited not only as mayor to have a chance to contribute towards the improvement and the long-term future of Channel Islands Harbor, but I'm most excited about really getting residents of the harbor, the beach areas, and throughout the city involved in the process. And that, to me, in fact, is probably the most exciting.
I have a question for you there. You say get involved in the process, but you're going to have a vote up or down of this new interim contract next week. So how much time do we have to get involved in the process? About an hour?
Well, it's a good question. So we have a committee, a city council committee. It's called the Channel Islands Harbor Task Force. I sit on that committee with Councilman Burperillo. And this Channel Islands Harbor Task Force was a dormant committee. And in fact, if I were to use the word dormant, to my knowledge, it never met. So it was just a committee. And so I found, or I thought, that with this 50-year agreement, going to expire, when I was elected mayor in 2010, I knew that the agreement was actually going to expire. That we had a couple years to kind of redo it. And so I started a process with the city staff and with the county staff and articulating what I wanted. And what I wanted is for our city staff and the departments to look at all the city relevant sides of the agreement and determine whether or not A, that was in the best interest of the city, and B, how could the agreement be better and better serve the residents of Channel Islands Harbor and the city of Oxnard, and extending into the beach areas. So, and that process started. So this agreement has been the subject of a lot of conversation at the task force level. Arguably, there could be even more, but it is going to go before the city council next week, and the public will have a chance, as of today is Tuesday, as of Thursday when it's published online, to thoroughly read the agreement and really advise the council before we ratify the agreement and determine whether or not we need changes before it's sent on to the Board of Supervisors.
For those who want to see that agreement, it will be on the City Council website. You can go in there, you can download the agenda for the March 17th meeting and see that agreement that Mayor Flynn is talking about. Let's hear from a resident now, a very analytical resident, David Finn.
Well, I've been, as George mentioned, speaking to many of the businesses throughout the harbor area, and I refer to the harbor area really as both sides of Channel Island Boulevard, both the south side of Channel Island Boulevard and the north side, the newer side of Channel Island Boulevard. There are a number of new neighborhoods, sub-neighborhoods perhaps you could call them, in the Channel Islands neighborhood, Seabridge, Westport, and the older Mandalay Bay neighborhood. And there are perhaps about 100 businesses south of Channel Island Boulevard on streets like Harbor Boulevard, Peninsula, and Victoria Avenue, and perhaps 50 to 75 businesses in the Channel Island Harbor area north of Channel Island Boulevard. And of course you have restaurants, you have retailers, you have different commercial businesses, you have offices, and as Mayor Flynn mentioned, there has been a change in the perhaps the economy in an aggregate sense and in a business by business sense, and you can look at businesses that have left the harbor. For instance, the hotel Channel, the hotel that was developed by Martin V. Smith in conjunction with a number of developments, Fisherman's Wharf, Casa Serena, Lobster Trap, the apartments there in Peninsula, and Casa Serena and Lobster Trap closing down has unfortunately hurt the harbor area. And at the same time, you've got many residents flowing to the area, attracted by the ocean, attracted by the water and the beautiful harbor area. And I've noticed that there are a number of developments in the city-controlled area north of Channel Island Boulevard that are making progress, and the area south of Channel Island Boulevard, controlled by the county, has struggled in its interest to develop commercial properties.
The Seabreeze and Westport development were both under the control of Oxnard?
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah. And Seabridge and Westport are newer developments, probably in the last decade. And I think what Dave just referred to is that what's come out of this committee, the subcommittee, not even a subcommittee, a committee, the Channel Islands Harbor Task Force, is that many residents that have gotten involved have come together, and not only to weigh in on this agreement, but also they're advocating changes in how much money they have to pay for the Harbor Patrol, whether the level of service provided by the Harbor Patrol is needed, number one, and if it is needed, what percentage of that then should be, the burden of the cost should be shouldered by these two newer developments, Westport and Seabridge. So it's kind of interesting here that in this discussion, and what to talk about is that there's a lot of confusion, George, quite frankly, about what's the county area, what's the city area, and just to define that very quickly, south of Channel Islands Bridge is the county-owned areas.
Now, when you say south of the bridge, is that just the area directly touching the water, or is that inland stuff like the peninsula and Hollywood Beach, and how far east near Victoria is considered part of the quote harbor?
Well, I think Silver Strand Beach is not. It's part of the county area. Silver Strand is also administered by the county of Ventura, as well as Hollywood Beach. So Hollywood and Silver Strand are part of the county of Ventura. I think Channel Islands Harbor largely refers to the properties that are south of the bridge at Channel Islands, and they are not only adjacent to the harbor itself, they're the businesses that kind of surround that immediate
What
area.
about Embassy Suites, which is a little north of the bridge? Is that considered part of it?
Embassy Suites is part of the city of Oxnard, and it's not in those county administered lands. But kind of going back a little bit, one of the things that's kind of come up from this residents group that's part of the Channel Islands Harbor Task Force is that all of these beach areas and coastal areas in and around Channel Islands Harbor should all be one. So they call it the one harbor concept. So it's kind of interesting, and that there shouldn't be two different harbors. But the reason why, in essence, there are, or at least in perception, two different harbors is that you have the county as one major landowner who owns land within the city limits, and then there's all the areas outside of that are owned by the city of Oxnard. So it's a very unique situation, and hopefully we're going to be able to make changes to make the area and the chances for the area to become great again better.
The next question is a little bit tough. I've heard from both of you that you feel the city doesn't have enough control over our fate in the harbor. And David pointed out to me the three harbors in the region, Santa Barbara Harbor, Ventura Harbor, Channel Islands Harbor. The first two are run by the localities, the last one's run by the county. I've been to all three. Which looks like it's more successful to you? Both of you.
Well, it's kind of hard to weigh in. I would just say that, Santa Barbara is obviously one of the top tourist destinations in the state of California. And so because people are going to go to Santa Barbara more than destinations in Ventura County, we certainly would like to have the same amount of tourists coming to Ventura County and to Oxnard as to Santa Barbara. But which harbor is more successful, I don't know, and maybe David's done that research, but in terms of because one thing can look one way, and then the reality is these businesses could be struggling. So they might all be open, but they might just barely be making payroll and paying the rent.
Well, how do you define success? Just on numbers, or citizen use, or what? What's success to you guys?
Yeah, well, Dave, you might want to answer that question. What do you think success is?
Well, I'd like to speak about the two other harbors' convenience in accessing information for the public in their websites is transparency and financial reporting. So getting to that answer, it's helpful in looking at those two harbors' performance to be able to simply go to their websites and pull up financial data for Santa Barbara Waterfront and Ventura Port District, Ventura Harbor. It would be easier to weigh and compare the performance of Channel Island Harbor if the County of Ventura Harbor Department had that information on their website, and hopefully that will be available in the future, but currently it's not.
So both those harbors north of us, cash flow positive and making money, or at least breaking even?
I am looking into that, and I have started a comparative analysis of Ventura Harbor and Channel Island Harbor, and I'm looking forward to completing that in the next month or so. But certainly financial, actual budgeted numbers are going to be a key part of that.
It's a little bit harder to do with Channel Islands Harbor because we have a Ventura County balance sheet and we have an Oxnard balance sheet, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, transparency is very important about this, but you're getting really to the core of the issue, and that is, what do people want to see in Channel Islands Harbor, and maybe kind of understanding a little bit about what's happened with Channel Islands Harbor. And I would say this, that as long as the harbor was thriving, and that could be defined in many ways, but a lot of businesses making money, a lot of tourism, a lot of great venues, great quality of life. As long as that prevailed, I don't think that many people had an issue with whether the county operates south of the bridge and the city's here. I don't think people really got into that. It's kind of like nobody really knew what the Electoral College was until the Bush v. Gore election and that outcome. Nobody really knew what it was until it actually came about. And I think in a very similar case or situation, it's the fact that Channel Islands Harbor, arguably for a good 25 years, has really struggled. And so, and it's not only that, but when you have two different governmental entities that are in control of various aspects of something like that, it really does cause a lot of confusion. So when people begin to ask questions about finances and transparency and defining what success is and what the future vision of the harbor is, Oxnard at various stages has been accused of having kind of a Byzantine system, and I would argue that probably if there's anything Byzantine about the county of Ventura, because I think it's actually pretty transparent, is probably Channel Islands Harbor. And so maybe in this case we have something in common, and in the fact that the city is working on ever increasingly being more transparent about it and accountable to the public about its finances. And I think too that the public's demanding the very same thing with the county. And also people are naturally, we have a lot of newer residents in the city of Oxnard and out at the beach areas. They would like to see a thriving harbor that I remember, again, as a kid growing up, was simply put second to none.
Comments?
Very true. I echo those comments.
So the answer to my question, along with the fact we don't really know exactly what the financial situation is that a fair assessment?
Well, the financial situation, as I understand it, without providing specifics, when we discuss the financial situation, it's first of all, it's the county, and how much money does the county get, and how much money does the county have to spend, and then there's how much money the city gets, and how much the city has to spend. I can say that a preliminary analysis has been done about how much the city of Oxnard incurs in terms of cost on an annual basis. And that right now, without getting into specifics, because they really want to make sure that they have the right numbers, that the amount that we're spending is not the amount that we're taking in. So if the harbor is not really thriving, and the city is spending more than what it's taking in, naturally that's a red flag, and it doesn't take a pool of consultants to figure out that there needs to be changes. And that's why the task force, again, was created and put forward. Let's get through this 50-year agreement, which really defines who's responsible for what, number one, and let's use that as a platform for a dialogue between the residents of the city of Oxnard and their government, both the county and the city. And it's important to note that the county and the city both serve the residents of the city of Oxnard. So it's not, even though they're two separate entities, it shouldn't be really separate when it comes to serving the interest of the people.
I'm going to ask you both, what do you think would have to go into that agreement to improve performance in the way that we envision?
Well, one of the very first things that we discussed on the Channel Islands Harbor Task Force were issues like a different business arrangement. As an example, I mean, if the county presumably, has no interest in not being an owner of the property, could the city and the county enter into maybe a relationship where we're more equitably sharing both revenues and cost of the harbor? That's number one. And secondly, I think a whole new system of governance. As an example, George, I sit on the Ventura County Airport Authority. And there are two airports that the County of Ventura runs and controls, and they are the Camarillo Airport and the Oxnard Airport. It is unimaginable under any circumstances that any decisions about the airports would be made only in the Board of Supervisors or at the Board of Supervisors, which is really what the current structure is with the county, before it goes to an authority. And the authority, the airport authority, consists of all the stakeholders, 2 county supervisors, city council members from the cities affected, Camarillo and Oxnard, and as well as residents at large. And so everything that the airport does first goes through that committee, through that authority, and after it goes to that authority, then recommendations are made by the authority to the County Board of Supervisors. But it's a great thing because oftentimes there can be controversies surrounding airports, as there are about harbors. And if those controversies then are best vetted through a more local process that involves people and it involves all the stakeholders, and it's vetted first so that by the time it gets to the Board of Supervisors level, hopefully, then all the kinks and all the problems, if there are any, are all worked out, and then the Board of Supervisors.
So basically the Board of Supervisors would play more of an advise and consent role rather than a planning role as they do now? Is that what you're advocating?
Yeah, well, what I'm advocating is a structure that's going to work. And I would argue right now that the structure of governance of Channel Islands Harbor could be vastly improved. And I think that a sign of that, I mean, the proof in the pudding is if you were to give the harbor a grade and say, George, let me ask you, I'm a teacher, and if I were to ask you to give it a grade, and if you were to give Channel Islands Harbor a grade, just overall, it's an overall feeling, versus Ventura versus Santa Barbara, what would you give those 3 harbors? And that, that's kind of a test. What do you think?
If I had to evaluate the 3 harbors, I'd try to do it financial and operational. First of all, financial, I'm thinking that Santa Barbara is a very bustling harbor. Unless they're getting very low rents, they're probably pretty well built out, pretty much fully billable and successful. Ventura seems like it peaks out on certain events, but it's slow in between, so it's probably not quite as successful. And it's also a very different harbor from Channel Islands, and it has a way less residential. And Santa Barbara, of course, has no residential at all. When we get into Channel Islands, we have buildings that are decaying and falling apart that have been empty for years. We have businesses that I know are struggling. I've been to businesses that try to get started and couldn't, and they blame the city for not being able to get approvals, and they blame all kinds of other people. I think that Channel Islands Harbor is in a pretty distant third. I haven't seen the books, though. Yeah,
and so one side of it is what government has to pay out for expenses, and then what revenues do they take in. So on the one hand, it's kind of a fiscal evaluation on a government level, and then the other side is, of these harbors, which one is thriving, or which amongst them are thriving, and what's not thriving. Now, I have to kind of back up and just say, it's not like there hasn't been some progress in Channel Islands Harbor. I think we need to be fair to the county and say, look, there's an unbelievable maritime museum. There's a boating center, although it's very, very controversial, there is a boating center. Again, the boating center, I think, is an added amenity to the community. Again, not getting into the location of the boating center, which was controversial. And certainly the Maritime Museum are all added amenities. And of course, finally, there's the Topper's Pizza. There was a building there that had been, I think it was called the Blue Dolphin when it was opened by a very famous restaurateur here in Oxnard, Pete Bocron. The Blue Dolphin went out of business, and then the building, I think someone else came in. It sat there vacant maybe for 20 years without a tenant. And now it has Topper's Pizza.
There are people waiting in line to get into Topper's.
Right.
When David and I were there on Saturday night when we walked by.
That's right.
Picture.
Topper's Pizza
Right.
could be the #1 destination in the harbor right now.
It is.
And it's got diversity, it's got a lot going for it.
Right, and let's not forget, there's not only the Whale's Tail, which has always been an institution in the city of Oxnard, and again, albeit the fact that the building is aging, and so things could be updated there, no question about it. But there are a lot of newer restaurants.
Well, Sea Fresh, the Lookout, and
That's
the
right.
Korean restaurant are all busy.
They're all busy. But George, the fact of the matter is, it's quite interesting when we discuss really what the future vision of the harbor is. There could be my vision, there could be your vision, Dave's vision, and then there are the residents. And I think what's most important is the county has to go, or should go, back to square one, and that is a visioning process, a charrette process that involves the residents of the city of Oxnard, where Channel Islands Harbor is located, on a future vision for the harbor. Because, quite frankly, as the boating center controversy illustrated, there's not a lot of consensus on the harbor. Everybody, for the most part, can agree that the harbor isn't where it needs to be. But when it comes to what vision people want to see with the harbor, there's a lot of controversy there. And a lot of people that live in and around the beach areas come from Los Angeles. They don't want to see, many of those people, a Marina del Rey or an overdeveloped harbor. And then there are other people who are either business owners or other residents. They want to see a lot more amenities. They want to see a real balance there.
Could we take a project as an example? Let's take the Casa Serena area.
Okay.
And there's several proposals on the table right now. You know something about it, you know something about it.
Okay.
Both of you tell us about that and the economics of that, the aesthetics of it, and whether it meets our goals.
Well, I mean, you've been to the Lobster Trap, you've been to the Casa Serena. I knew both of those places when they were next to brand new, right? And to say they were thriving was an enormous understatement, right? But again, those buildings are shuttered, just like Fisherman's Wharf. And I'm not really the one to evaluate what the proposals are, because, quite frankly, no one knows what the proposals are.
Correct.
And that's part of the problem. And there's where the Byzantine side of this whole thing is. Not only about the finances and more details about the finances, but the bottom line is no one really knows, with any offer on what's going to be done at Fisherman's Wharf, no one really knows exactly what's coming forward, because the county solicits bids from private entities. Those private entities all bid on what it is, what projects they like to bring forward. It's discussed by the Board of Supervisors in closed session to determine which of the bids is the most viable. And once that then is decided upon, then the developer goes out and tries to sell the project to the community. So where it's Byzantine is normally, in any other process, it's open from the very, very beginning. So you're not having a bidding war going on. You're having developers come forward saying, we'd like to develop here, or we'd like this infill here, or whatever, and they do what's called a pre-review. And that the pre-review is to solicit the views of the decision makers and also get input from the public.
Now, who are they running that by, the county or the city or both?
Well, in the context of Oxnard, we don't have to run anything by the county. A developer comes forward with a project. The city council's views are solicited. This isn't always done, but oftentimes it's done. And then the public hears what the proposal is by the developer, and then they get a chance to weigh in on it. In this process, that doesn't take place. The bidding takes place behind closed doors. There's sealed bids. They're open. I guess the county staff evaluates them, makes recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. They decide which of the offers is the best, they think is the best, who's bringing the most to the table in terms of financing, track record, everything that they have. And then it's up to that developer then to go out and sell it to the public. So that makes the public naturally very suspicious, because they don't know what's coming forward until it's already come forward.
Not transparent.
Yeah, that's if I could interject, that's one of the prime differences with Ventura Harbor. Ventura Harbor works very closely with the city of Ventura with their entire standard planning review process. Planning Commission now, Design Review Committee, for instance, in Ventura is overseeing a project that's been discussed for almost 20 years, a Sonderman Ring project that has received California Coastal Commission. And so in Ventura, unlike Channel Islands Harbor, they don't use exclusive right to negotiate. And for Ventura Harbor, that's worked pretty well.
Interesting wrinkle, huh?
So going back to that's why a new vision for the harbor is so important, because first, I think if you get people, a vast majority of people, it's always going to be by majorities, to buy in to what the vision is of Channel Islands Harbor. I don't know what that vision is. I know that there is something called the Public Works Plan, which is the county's master plan for the harbor. If I'm not mistaken, it's over 2 decades old. There have been some updates to that. But I mean, 2 decades old, I mean, 3/4 of the people that are living right now in and around that area probably weren't here 2 decades ago. We have a completely different set of people. So I think what's most important, whether it's Fisherman's Wharf, whether it's next to the whale's tail, or whether it's the lobster trap and the old Costa Serena. Doesn't matter what it is. There needs to be public participation and buy-in to a vision for the harbor. And then, quite frankly, I don't think the public would be as skittish or even as suspicious about what's coming forward, because quite frankly, I don't know what the vision is for the harbor. I don't know if the public knows what the vision is for the harbor, and I think it's important to establish
Resident question, why would you vote on a contract renewal then if you don't have answers to those questions that should be prerequisites for something like that?
Because the city of Oxnard does not have, George, under the current agreement, and that's something we want to work on with the county in a collaborative way. The city of Oxnard does not have jurisdictional authority. The city of Oxnard does not have the power, the authority to determine what any of that's going to be. That's exclusive to the county of Ventura. And the only instance where the county has to come for the city for approval in a real important way or legitimate way is if whatever the county is proposing or whatever the developer is proposing exceeds the public works plan that is now several decades old. Then the city has to be conferred, it has to be decided upon, is the city going to allow it or not, because it has public works implications, it has a variety of traffic, a variety of implications.
Yeah, jump right in here whenever you want to, by the way.
Well, that's why I'm very interested to see the financial numbers, how the city's revenue from the harbor compares to its expenses. I'm very interested to see the preliminary agreement or the operating agreement coming out in a couple days, as I think that it could perhaps harm the city's interest long term for the broader discussion about the development authority that currently is 100% with the county, toward the interests of county taxpayers, of city residents, of local community residents, to see a return back to 15, 20, 25 years ago when the harbor was thriving so well.
If the city took on more responsibility, both fiscal and operational, right now we're buying deficits. Can the city afford to even do that right now?
Well, I think you've got to go back to really from a beginning point, of we've started the dialogue through this 50-year agreement.
Correct.
The 50-year agreement is simply who's going to do what, and when it comes to maintenance of the harbor area, right? And this then serves as the platform for discussing a future cooperative agreement, a new governance structure, a completely different business model, and in fact, that's getting to cutting to the chase. It's exactly what I advocated from the get-go, saying, the county collects leases. It's the one that leases the properties because it owns the property. It leases the property, and people then they negotiate it and they pay the county a lease. The city, on the other hand, collects sales taxes, of course, and the county and state and everybody gets a percentage of sales taxes, and of course then because it's incorporated in the city collects property taxes too. But again, if the harbor is not thriving and there's not a lot of business activity, it doesn't take an economist to understand that there's not a lot of revenue that's going to be coming in for the city unless it's thriving and viable. And so, I would rather go at it from a more positive standpoint of saying, well, rather than the city taking on more of a liability, to simply say, no, we have an excellent opportunity with the conclusion of this 50-year or this renewal of this current agreement or expired agreement to engage the county in a dialogue about the future. And when it comes to development of the harbor, I would argue that the people of Oxnard, it's part of the city of Oxnard. The people of the city of Oxnard should have the greatest role. They should have as much influence, if not more influence, about what happens at the harbor than the county or the city. Because we're the ones representing you.
Right.
We're the ones that represent the people.
Now, do you think this new agreement will embody that, or is this kind of a transitional thing to move in that direction?
It's a transitional thing, I hope, to move in that direction. What's going to happen next week, and in fact, it kind of reminds me that I need to touch base about what's the points that are going to be made on this next week's agenda. But there are three things that this task force sought out to accomplish. Number one, go through this agreement, put together a new agreement, the staff would, and then have it be presented to the task force. A summary of that agreement was presented to the task force. Secondly, the Residents Committee has already submitted a report, which I've read, which is outstanding, which is addressing the issue of the cost that the Westport and Seabridge developments bear for the paying of the Harbor Patrol. And the third issue is the system of governance. And so all of this is going to be presented then next week. The agreement is the only thing that the council has to ratify, but suggestions on governance, on the recommendations of the committee, that's going to be up to the city council as a whole to weigh into that. And so we're going to present the findings of the Channel Islands Harbor Task Force, of which this agreement is one of three different things that are going to be brought forward.
Two-pronged question. Number one, what's the duration of this interim agreement? And two, does it get you any additional things you don't have now, do you think?
Well, I know that what the city manager asked of the staff was, I want to take a look first and foremost at what the costs are for the city and what it is that we're doing. So I would expect and I would hope that the new agreement then will entail exactly that. Whatever it is that we're proposing to do is going to equal the amount of revenue that we're going to be, that we'll collect. And that we're going to leave it open, of course, because it's not part of this current agreement, about sharing the responsibility of making decisions about how the harbor is developed. That is not in this agreement. So this agreement is not addressing how the city and the county will work on developing the harbor and what that process is. The process remains the same. But I believe the 50-year agreement, and this is how it all started, and I saw that this 50-year agreement was ready to expire. I thought, this is the time to address these long-standing issues with the county. And George, I would say we're halfway there.
Halfway there. So what, you didn't answer the question as to the duration of this agreement you're being asked.
I believe it's a decade. I believe it's
10 years.
Yeah.
Right? So that's, if you look at that, that's a long time if it gives us 10 more years under what's basically a status quo. But 10 years is also not a long enough horizon for a business to plan to amortize their investment. So it seems like an awkward period, just listening to it real quick.
Well, the previous agreement was half a century, and,
yes,
and it was updated. And I think that what's important about it is that a decade to me seems reasonable. Maybe the council is going to say, we don't like a decade, we'd like 5 years, and that's going to be up to the city council. And it's important to mention that the Channel Islands Harbor Task Force, which has done a lot of work, and the Residents Committee has done a lot of work, ultimately it's not up to the task force to make decisions about, in the end, what's going to happen. It's going to be the full city council.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty good overview, would you say, audience? Do you have any further questions or comments to put in, David?
I suggested recently at a Channel Harbor Task Force that because the supervisor for District 5, Supervisor Zaragoza, and certainly the Harbor Director, Lynn Krieger, is so influential in the harbor operations and the questions on governors perhaps going forward, that it would be perhaps helpful for the community to hear directly from both individuals if the opportunity presents itself at a city council meeting. I've been to 4 presentations by the Harbor Director, Lynn Krieger, and every time it was interesting, some of the comments and information that she presented. And I think that the city would benefit from that presentation to the city, and the opportunity for the council to ask questions about the harbor operations and the finances.
Would our format next week permit that?
Well, that's a good question, and I would certainly hope it would, because the city should be open not only to anyone from the county making a presentation or offering their perspective. I think it's part of that ongoing dialogue. And what a better place to do that but at the city council chambers, where it's going to be televised, going to be repeated right on the city local channel. So members of the public that aren't able to attend the actual meeting itself, and I do ask people to attend next week's meeting and weigh in on it, because it's very important to hear from the public. But if they're not able to attend the meeting, then they're able to watch it and really understand about what's going on at Channel Islands Harbor. But I think in the end, we've really, I think, started on the right track. I'm very hopeful, and I'm encouraged, and I'm excited, George, that the city and this committee that we've started on Channel Islands Harbor is taking the city of Oxnard, Channel Islands Harbor, and the residents of the city, along with the county, in a very positive direction.
All right, so you've heard it directly from the mayor. He'd like you to become engaged. Come to next week's Tuesday night, 6 p.m. City Council meeting at Council Chambers, if you can. If you can't, watch it on TV. That's channel 20, what is the channel number?
I think it's 10.
10, excuse me, channel 10. I always come to the meetings. I never watch on TV, so I don't
Okay.
even know. I want to thank Mayor Flynn and David Finn for coming out to the Good Morning Oxnard in the evening show. And we're signing off for the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.